When someone deeply listens to you, it's like holding out a dented cup, a cup you've had since childhood, and watching it fill with cold, fresh water. When it balances on the top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life, and the place where you wrote your first poem begins to glow in your mind's eye. When someone deeply listens to you, it is as if gold has been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet on the earth feel the ground, and the beloved land that seemed very distant is now at home within you. The universe seems to work in odd and complex ways. I had sorted out what I was going to preach about this week here with you folks, and then during the week, I received this poem. A friend of mine, he and I exchange poetry probably 3 or 4 times a week, just sort of works out in rotation of some strange way. And this came from him this week. It's called Ways to Listen, an Incomplete List, by a poet named Rosemary Watola Tomer. This is what she wrote. There is lonely listening when sitting in a crowd, opening listening as one listens, eyes closed, to the wind in the cottonwood trees, numb listening as one listens to detergent commercials, baffled listening as one tries to discern if the speaker could possibly believe what they say, full-bodied listening as a cello plays. Sometimes I've felt my whole being break with delight in joyful listening to my daughter's laughter, and break equally with the unbearable listening as the soil falls on the casket. There's the holy listening when we listen for the dead, and greedy listening in which every other utterance is merely a ladder rung for stepping into telling your own story. Selfless listening knows. Just done something here with my phone. Selfless listening. Sorry, friends. There's the way you sometimes listen to me, as if my words are waves on the river, not something to interpret, but something familiar. And the way you sometimes listen to my silence and know precisely what I mean. There's nervous listening as one listens to the mouse in the wall, and vast listening like on a clear night, lit only by stars. I can almost sense how the universe not only sings through my body, but listens to it too, listens to itself, and knows itself in the listening. When I was in high school, I inherited my grandfather's 1963 Chevy pickup truck. She was a beauty. Or he was a beauty. It was a beauty, I'm not sure. Seafoam green, stick shift running boards on the side, and soon after I got it, this was the 70s, an 8-track player. And on both doors, the hand-stenciled words, Blanchard Monuments. Before long, friends took to simply calling it one of two things. They either called it the Monument or the Blanchmobile. I'd ridden in that truck almost all of my life, and it became a prized possession. For over 100 years, my ancestors carved and sold and placed gravestones in the village cemeteries around Baldwinsville, New York, just north of Syracuse. I grew up accompanying my Grandpa Jay on these forays into the cemetery. Strangely enough, at that age, I thought it was sort of a treat to go with him. I kind of came to the point of thinking of cemeteries as playgrounds. I'm sure I was no help to my grandfather at all, but it gave my grandmother a break from me. But he made me feel like I was a help. He'd have me go pick dandelions or wipe lichen off of old ancient stones, or he might give me a bag to pick up litter. At 6 years old, that was sort of my pay grade. And it's taken all these decades now to really understand what I thought was the strangest instruction he gave me as I walked among these monuments. Monuments that were, most of them, quite a bit taller than I was. He'd say, "Scotty," that's my middle name, "when you're doing your task, I want you to listen. There are a lot of stories in here, but you must listen." I didn't know enough to be frightened by his instructions. And being alone, no one to talk to, listening seemed about the only thing that I could possibly do. So I did. And it seemed very quiet, as far as I could tell. And when he asked me what I had heard, and I reported, nothing more than the fire whistle downtown, and the honking geese in the river, and a few barking dogs. And he'd predictably say to me, "Well, next time then. But listen." His counsel has served me well, especially in the calling that I ended up with in ministry. I have come after all these years to realize that I have no doubt at all that all the talking that comes in ministry can't hold a candle to the value of whatever time I've spent listening. This, of course, he confesses to while talking. Nowhere has my Grandpa Jay's admonition made a greater impact than when planning memorial services. It seems I've failed to get too far from my family business, going into ministry and having to deal frequently with death. But as my grandfather said, in relationship to his business, there's going to be no shortage of customers. I hesitate to guess how many memorial services I've done over these years, probably something around 400. But that doesn't count what I consider the real memorial services that typically happen in the days before any public ritual of mourning. The ones I am talking about typically happen sitting around someone's kitchen table with people whose grief is raw, not yet fully absorbed. And they are times of depth and despair and intensity and release and bewilderment and clarity. And my job in those moments is only to listen deeply. I bring a steno pad when I go, and I jot down just words and phrases, and I take note of the dynamic of the family sitting around the kitchen table, and do my best to ply stories from them, things deeper than mere biographical details. And typically photos are passed around the table and coffee is brewed and people laugh and cry and laugh. And details are bickered over among the family. No, that was in 1964. No, it was in 1967. And subtle hints of healing sometimes make an appearance in the fertile pauses of that holy silence. And 99 times out of 100, the most important question that I ever pose is one that I have to explain very, very clearly and specifically. I'm known to ask, what was the deceased person's greatest struggle in their life? And without pausing, I assure them that whatever they tell me is not going to be part of the service itself. It's context for me to understand more completely who the person is. I especially have to ask the question when I haven't known the deceased, which of course happens from time to time. And what I typically learn explains volumes about what's shaped that person's whole life. Just a related anecdote for this. An elderly woman in one of my congregations was heir to the 3M Corporation. She was as shy as she was rich. She was not wealthy. She was rich. I never saw her without these mammoth Jackie O sunglasses, even in her own home. She was a major benefactor of the church, museums in Syracuse, the symphony, and hospitals, funding a burn unit in one of the hospitals which bears her name. And when she died, not in the kitchen, but in the solarium, I sat with her 2 adult children. And I listened hard. They didn't have a wonderful relationship with their mother. They offered mostly superficial details about her philanthropy and her public accolades as a benefactor of so many organizations. And then I asked my question, quote unquote, and they got very quiet and looked at each other and looked at the floor. And then the daughter spoke. And I learned that when her mom was 14 years old, this would be in the early part of the 20th century, her parents went out on a New Year's Eve junket to a party. And the woman was charged with babysitting her little brother. And after she got him to be sound asleep, being 14 years old, she snuck out to a friend's party in the neighborhood. And when she was gone, the lights on the Christmas tree ignited the tree, and her brother passed. And suddenly, everything about this woman made a kind of sense to me. A kind of sense that completed an understanding, to some degree, of what she carried all her life. Most of the time, we think of listening as something that requires someone else to be the speaker. But that isn't the kind of listening that my Grandpa Joy slyly suggested. This is more like the kind of listening that Parker Palmer described when he wrote Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you've decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent, that tell you who you are. The capacity to listen to ourselves is a skill that's very hard in this very noisy world that we inhabit. You really have to work pretty hard at it, to listen with intention and purpose, and to put all distractions aside. How would you all, amongst the living here, answer for yourself what has been the source and substance of your greatest struggle in life, the greatest pain you may have encountered? Most of us would rather not do that. I know I'm not too keen to climb into that cave alone myself. But I have, and I've lived to tell about it. It seems to require us to put pain and shame aside and simply to listen to our own life without judgment and without pain, without blame. The past somehow can become our greatest teacher. It's rarely silent. So patience is required. As Thornton Wilder has one of his characters saying in his play Our Town, reminiscing on the life they had lived while they are reposing in the cemetery. I imagine most of you envision that from having seen the play. But he has one character say, in recollection, looking back, "My, wasn't life awful and wonderful? My, wasn't life awful and wonderful?" A poem by David Ray titled "Thanks, Robert Frost" has been running through my mind as I've been pondering this morning's message. I think you'll understand. This is the first section of the poem. Do you have hope for the future? Someone asked Robert Frost toward the end. Yes. And even for the past, he replied. That it will turn out to have been all right for what it was. Something we can accept. Mistakes made by the selves that we had to be. Not able to be perhaps what we wished. Or looking back, half the time it seems we could so easily have been or ought. Hope for the future, yes. And even for the past. That it will become something we can bear. Those last two lines. The future, yes, and even for the past, that it will become something we can bear. That idea of hope for the past. I haven't been able to get that notion out of my head. It's so counterintuitive. I have hope for plenty of things in the unformed future. But the past, well, that's really another story. It takes a kind of courage or even resilience to peer into the past in search of the signs of hope we may have missed at the time. If we deeply listen to the past, we're likely to encounter events and decisions and mistakes and failures that we'd prefer not to be reminded of. And that is, of course, fair enough. I know I have quoted this before, but there is this powerful insight by the Indian mystic Rabindranath Tagore that's helped me shift perspectives on how we view ourselves in relationship to the storms and the struggles that we all eventually encounter in the past, and of course we will in the future. He said, "The mountain remains unmoved by the apparent defeat of the mist." The mountain remains unmoved by the apparent defeat by the mist. I'm reminded of this truth almost every day because where I live, in the Tully Valley south of Syracuse, the forested hills across the valley are frequently obscured by morning mist. They were this morning. But a few hours later, I can look again and the mist has not defeated the mountains. So I'm reminded that we all are a mountain. The mist just does what the mist is supposed to do. I realize that hope is usually reserved somewhere for the future, for what is yet to occur, for our aspirations and longings and dreams that live in the future. The notion for having hope for the past defies the logic of our linear thinking, where the past is over and done and shut up and out of view and sight and sound. A function of where I am naturally in the span of my life, even under the most optimistic circumstances. The years of the past outnumber the years of the future. But that really doesn't have a lot of bearing on the magnitude of the hopes that constantly engage my spirit and soul as I anticipate the time ahead, the time that is metaphorically left on the clock. And thank God, none of us know what time it is. It's not an easy thing to reclaim hope from losses and disappointments of the past. Confronting parts of our own past requires considerable vulnerability, and it calls on that elusive energy that somehow can generate self-forgiveness for ourselves. For, as the poet said, the mistakes we made by the selves we had to be. And lastly, it calls for pride, just plain old pride, that in spite of the mist that has come upon us, we have all somehow survived and even thrived. Someday, I'll have a stone in the Riverside Cemetery up in Baldwin's. And I'll be lined up with a batch of Blanchards that go back to the administration of Millard Fillmore. All quite tasteful and elegant, suitable for a family who made their living selling gravestones. And the last I looked, there is a spot left there beside my grandfather. I won't need a lot of room. and I'm in no hurry. But it's an eventuality that I am at peace with. And I'd like to imagine someday it'll be my grandchildren who will have the occasion to perhaps brush the lichen off of my stone and spend a little time standing there. Just listening.